Imagine an arid hurricane that hovered over the U.S. plains for over a decade, each gust of wind sweeping the Midwest in dust, darkness, and debt, leaving a wake of hunger in countless homesteads. Jobs were hard to come by, and Okie scrambled to make do. It's a time remembered for struggle and hardship, and the nation's leading documentarian of pivotal history saw more. Ken Burns' iconic reputation is carried into his newest film, The Dust Bowl.
I think when we look at our popular culture, we sort of see Hollywood as this infinite number of different stories, when in fact it has 6 or 7 or 8 plot lines. Documentary, on the other hand, is infinitely diverse. It's as diverse as the number of people and stories there are to tell. And I started off wanting to be a feature filmmaker, a Hollywood filmmaker, and realized that, and sort of changed directions and became a documentary filmmaker because I felt you could communicate so much more with equal power. The same laws of storytelling apply to documentary as they apply to feature films. And I can't think of a better story than the Dust Bowl story, because this is a group of so-called ordinary people, a bottom-up story of extraordinary heroism, of human folly, of a great tension between Mother Nature and human nature. Mother Nature more than often wins. It just has every single element. And when you add the superlatives that we are wont to add, this is the greatest man-made ecological disaster in American history superimposed over the worst economic cataclysm in human history, then you've got a good story going.
His concept was brought to life with the help of many others who shared the belief in telling a nation's story.
The idea for the Dust Bowl came from Dayton Duncan, who wrote the script and is the senior producer on the film. And several years ago, he wrote a book called Miles from Nowhere about counties with fewer than 2 people per square mile in the United States. And he wound up crisscrossing a couple of the Dust Bowl counties, including Cimarron County. And in the back of his mind, he said, I need to find out a little bit more about the Dust Bowl, and this might be a good idea for a film. He was sidetracked when we produced and made the national parks, which took us about 10, 12 years, and then we circled back and said, this is a story we really need to do. We interviewed 130 people over the age of 82 to get eyewitness accounts, or what we call survivor accounts. We wound up filming 30 of them.
When we talk about character lives, Hollywood versus this documentary field, I mean, these aren't people that are just playing a role. This was their actual reality. So how do you find those characters to embody what you want to invoke?
That's a really wonderful question. The laws of storytelling are the same, whether it's a feature film or it's a documentary. You could go back to Aristotle's Poetics to tell you that a story had a beginning, a middle, and end. There had to be character development, the climax, the denouement, whatever it is that you see as the element of stories. They're true for documentaries and they're true for feature films. What's so good about documentaries is that it's real. I mean, the most obvious aspect of it is that it's real. These lives really happen. So our job is to listen, to investigate, to look, to discover these lives. But then our job is to figure out how to distill the essence of their stories into something that fits the laws of good storytelling. But we're not a screenwriter superimposing what happened. When this family, which had hoped to have a section of land that they could farm and hand on to their sons, ends up living in a chicken coop because it's the only thing they could afford to live in, that is an amazing story that no screenwriter in Hollywood could make up.
OETA will debut Burns' documentary November 18th. He hopes his story will power through the airwaves with a message of strength and significance.
We have a great tradition of just showing life as it is, but we've also have a tradition of advocating. I want to be somewhere in between. I want to observe life. I want to tell complicated dimensions of our history and therefore our present, because our history is always influencing our present, and allow people to make the decisions that they need to make, to be inspired as they would be inspired. I don't want to tell them how to feel. I want to give them the opportunity to feel. And so any legacy that you might be talking about is just those moments when you're walking along a street and somebody comes up and says, hey, you know, my dad and I every January take out the 18.5 hours of baseball and we look at it again. Or, you know, I'm here at West Point because when I was 7 or 8 years old, my mom and dad showed me your film on the Civil War, and then we went to Gettysburg, and I really wanted to serve my country. The legacy is not in anything that I've done as much as the reactions that people have, or don't have, as the case may be, to these films, to these stories, to these subjects. So in the end, you can pull the film away, you can pull me away, you can even pull the extraordinary people who work on these films away. And what you're left is with whatever you bring to that moment, what your responses are, and what you do with that. And that's the best kind of communication. It doesn't, you know, it's acknowledging that you're equal, that there is no communication except among equals. If I'm talking down to you, nothing can happen. If I'm talking up to you, nothing can happen. That we have to look at each other as equal human beings and say, hey, you know what? I think this is a really good story.
For Roots TV, I'm Bonnie Campo.